What is £1,000 really worth? Welcome to this week's edition of Money Matters. I deeply, truly believe that money does matter. Not for the money itself, but rather for the choices it gives. Where do we get our money beliefs from? We were taught things like money is the root of all evil. Then as we got a bit more sophisticated and we grew up a little bit, we were taught that the love of money is the root of all evil. And then when we got to 16, 17, 18, that message changed again to money's not bad. It's more a question of what you do with that money. So that message evolves, and there's still a huge negative stigma in many parts of the world with having a lot of money. So if you accept my general argument that a lot of your money beliefs are going to be from your family, from your parents, from your grandparents, then I want to look at 3 generations of my family and the way in which it influenced the way that they looked at money, and just see if you're interested in this. Okay, so just Google Bank of England inflation calculator, and it's free. It's just an online tool that you can use. So what I did is I went back to 1804, which is the 100 years before my granddad was born, in 1904, to see what was happening with money. 1804 to 1904 was where his beliefs in money and the value of money were deeply rooted. And don't forget, at that time, the British Empire was in full swing. We're talking about the entire reign of Queen Victoria. So if you had £1,000 in 1804, 100 years later, to have the same buying power, what does that mean? Well, to buy the same amount of eggs or cows or houses or whatever, to buy the same amount of stuff in 1904 versus 1804, how much money would you need? And in these days of, prices are always going up, most people would instinctively think, oh, I need more money. No, you'd be wrong. Because look at this. Instead of £1,000 in 1804, in 1904, you could get the same amount of goods and services for less money. It's actually 800 and odd pounds. Look at the screen. So inflation across those years, that 100 years that led up to my granddad being born, was actually negative. It was deflation. How can that be? How can money get more valuable over time? Well, I said I was going to talk about gold, didn't I? So the UK and America and many countries around the world were on what's known as the gold standard. You could take your money into the bank and they would swap it for a certain amount of gold. Yes, it was a promise to pay. Yes, it was paper, but it was backed by gold. So you could literally take it and swap it for gold. And that's the whole idea of the gold standard. And therefore, if you've got pounds or dollars or euros, but they're actually gold, because you can actually go into a bank and change them for gold, that's why over that 100 years, money got more valuable, because gold got more valuable. So in simple terms, during my granddad's time, let's say that this €50 note was equivalent to the £1,000. With the rate of increase over that previous 100 years, it's almost like he got an extra 10 or 20 euros for free. So his €50 became worth 60 or 70. So keeping money as money wasn't a silly thing to do then, especially if you could put it in the bank and get a few percent interest and all of those things. And also the price of things was coming down. So what does that do? It delays your reason to buy things, because if you wait a year or two, they'll be cheaper. Plus, you can get some interest in the bank. So it's a whole different way of thinking. It's not about sticking it on the credit card, because there wasn't a credit card. The fact that prices were coming down and money was getting more valuable delayed your consumption, made it much more likely that you would save, and you certainly wouldn't get into debt because people didn't borrow money. Big corporations or wealthy people might borrow money, but the normal, person in the street didn't borrow money. Okay, so let's zoom forward now to 1935, because that's when my dad was born. And if you go back 100 years before that, 1835, look at what's going on in 1835. Take the same argument. You're €50 to have £1,000 of purchasing power 100 years later. How much would my dad need when he was born? Well, the answer is 1,700 quid. So, in other words, money has gone down in value. The £1,000 is now nowhere near worth £1,000. You'd need to have 1,700. So that's like starting with 50, and suddenly it's only worth 20 or 30. Complete behaviour change. What happened in 1931 was that the UK came off the gold standard. So your paper money was no longer linked to gold. So we'd broken that relationship in the United Kingdom, but it wasn't totally broken from an international perspective because the United States was still on the gold standard. Countries that weren't on the gold standard couldn't go too mad and print loads of cash, because if they did, they'd simply devalue their currency against the dollar. So the global reserve currency, the most important currency in the world by the 1930s, was the dollar, and it was still on the gold standard. So let's roll forward to me, to my birth year, which is 1964. So 1864 to 1964, Dad, Granddad still very much around, obviously when I was born. Now, that £1,000, to have the same purchasing power, suddenly I need £6,000. So let's use this as a £1,000 note 100 years before I was born. To have the same purchasing power as this £1,000 note, I know it's a €10, how much would I need? Or suddenly I'd need 60 to buy the same amount of stuff that I could have bought for 10 all those years ago. And if we bring that right up to date, and we say, well, what about someone born today? Well, someone born today, 100 years ago, would be 1923 to 2023. To have the same purchasing power today that you'd have had to have 100 years ago, so this is, my grandchildren, my youngest grandchild is 2, suddenly the world we live in is completely and utterly different. Because in order to have the same purchasing power as £1,000 back in the day, 100 years ago, you would now need, I haven't even got enough euros in my pocket, you would need 50,000. So money has gone down in value, paper money, fiat money has gone down in value by 50 times. Or to put it differently, money now is worth only 2% of what it was 100 years ago. So how can you protect and grow your wealth? Because if you want money to matter, you need to have the requisite amount of money to actually be able to buy things that enrich your life and to help people in ways that enrich your life and theirs. So what can you do? Well, you could buy gold. You could put yourself on your own personal gold standard. Now that will protect your wealth. So for instance, if you'd have bought £1,000 worth of gold or $1,000 worth of gold 5 years ago, well, that gold today is going to be worth roughly 60% more in money than it was 5 years ago. So if you'd have put, I don't know, £1,000 in, well, 60% of 1,600. So today, your £1,000 would have been worth £1,600. So it's protected it. It's protected your purchasing power, but it hasn't grown your wealth. So if you want to grow your wealth, what have I been doing for the last 40 years? I've been buying houses. So look at this chart. This chart shows you what a house costs in the UK, but it's very similar in the other, major economies like the United States or whatever. So if you'd have bought a house the year 1971, which is the start of this chart, that the US came off the gold standard and we broke that relationship between money and gold. So in 1971, you could have bought something for £5,000. What's it worth today? 300,000. So if you'd have converted your money into property, up in value. If you'd have put £1,000 50 years ago into property, it would now be worth 30 times that much to 60 times that much, depending on where you bought and how you bought. So if we just take a point in the middle, let's say it's worth 50 times more. You put your money into houses, 50 years ago, it's now going to be worth 50 times more, which is way faster than the destruction in the value of currency. So you're going to gain on your capital appreciation. But the other thing that property gives you that gold doesn't is it gives you money every month. It's called rent. So that's why in the English language, property is so important. And that's why we have sayings like, as safe as houses. So if you want to protect and grow your wealth, I think you need to be looking at investing in property. And please look at the real value of money. Please have a look at the Bank of England inflation calculator. Now, you might be sat there the other side of this camera lens thinking, well, that's great, Paul, but I don't have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 pounds to buy property with. Well, two things. First, There'll be a link below. Click it, buy yourself a ticket, and come along for 2 days to Wealth Through Property. We'll give you a 2-day insight into how you invest in property. And here's the news. You don't need to start with a massive amount of money. In fact, you can start with none. Or do you want to do the advanced one? And I do mean advanced, because I'm going to be talking about commercial property. I'm going to be talking about tax, structure, pensions. So if you're already a property investor or business owner, you probably want the advanced one. But either way, you choose the one that's right for you, and come and see what your options are. Just understand how you can not only protect your wealth, but you can genuinely grow your wealth. And the other way that you can grow your wealth or protect your wealth is by joining me next week. Because what I'm going to be talking about is, if the idea of putting £50,000 down as a deposit on a property is blowing your brain, and you want to do it for £1 instead of £50,000, well, join me next week, and I'll show you how to protect your wealth starting from £1. Hope you enjoyed this week's edition of Money Matters. I'm going to leave you now to think about everything I've just said, and probably go and have a little play on the Bank of England inflation calculator and see what the value of money really is, because it absolutely gets destroyed over time. 2024 and beyond, I think that process is going to speed up. You've been wonderful. I've been Paul. See you next week.